What is going on YouTube? What is happening, everybody out there in Lions Nation? It is good to be back. I had a good, nice long vacation, but we are finally back to here to talk some Lions. Welcome into the Lions Pulse. I'm your host, Miko, and this is a place where we kind of kick back, hang out, talk all the latest news about the Lions, or just some random topics that may come to mind that I feel like we should probably dive into as a fan base and just have some good discussion about. Like I said at the top of the show, just coming back from vacation. So I'm gonna let you guys know right now, I'm still somewhat in vacation mode. So if this show's a little rocky, if I kind of ramble at times, or if I just kind of seem a little lost, my mind is still somewhat in California. Had an amazing time with the family. 10 days out in Cali. Weather was amazing. You never notice, I never noticed how amazing or like how subpar the weather is here until you go somewhere where it's 70, somewhere between the 70s and the 80s, and like there's no humidity, there's no bugs, there's no like clouds. It was literally just sunny and just good temperatures all like every day we were there. Shout out to my wife for putting together an amazing trip. 3 days of Disneyland with the kids. And I say that like some people like think about Disneyland and they just like I've heard people, they kind of like dread the idea of going to Disneyland or Disney World with their kids. For us, it's the most amazing time, and I think it's because me and my wife are giant, kids ourselves. So as much as we want the kids to be able to enjoy themselves, riding rides, meeting the characters, and all that type of stuff, excuse me, we're just as interested in doing all of those things. So, 3 days at Disneyland slash Disney California Adventures. Got to do the whole like Avengers campus thing, which was dope. I'm a huge Marvel fan, so like that was like literally the highlight of like our Disney days for me, being able to go out there and see the different shows they had out there. If you've never been to Disneyland, I would definitely encourage you to go. Um, Again, it's a pricey trip. I ain't gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna sit here and try to sugarcoat it. Flying from Michigan to California and staying the amount of time we stayed definitely put a dent in your boy's pocket. But it's one of those experiences, one of those trips that I'll never forget. It was so nice. Weather was dope. Literally, like the day we landed, people out there just were like, I don't know, like I kind of just expected people to be a little more uppity, a little more just like, not really friendly in that sense, but literally like from the moment we landed, everybody was so nice, so helpful. Shout out to the lady at the car rental spot. We were supposed to get like a nice like mid-size like SUV, and she ended up like upgrading us for free. So for the 10 days we were out there, I was driving in luxury. So it was dope. Like literally just the way that people treated us out there was awesome. Um Again, going back to Disneyland, like I said, if you've never been, absolutely go. It's one of those places. I know a lot of people, and typically, like I'm this way too, a little bit. When you go to like amusement parks, you don't want to spend a ton of money on the food because it's overpriced or whatever the case may be. Disneyland is one of those places where you will want to try the food. It is literally worth every penny. I couldn't be like literally everything that I paid for, I felt like it was justified with the price. Couple things that I'll like name off real quick, and we'll start to kind of jump into the show. Give some shout outs to the people in the chat because I'm really appreciative of you guys coming and hanging out on a Monday night here with me. But there was a Pop Tart that they got there, bro. I've seen people make like Pop Tarts from scratch, and for the most part, they look like normal Pop Tarts, except the pastry might be a little more like crispy or browned a little bit. Disneyland has a Pop Tart there that will make you never want to buy another Pop Tart from the store ever again in your life. It was that amazing. I bought it twice. Like that's how good it was. That we like out of the 3 days we went there, I bought it twice. That's how good it was. They have beignets. So if you've like ever watched like The Princess and the Frog, Tiana makes like these beignets. So they have like a New Orleans section in Disneyland where they sell these. Fire. First day we went there, I bought two. So I bought like they come in packs of three. So we had six. So split it between me and my wife and my two girls. They were so good. I took like the last one. Like I was supposed, my wife was like, "Hey, aren't you gonna split that with the girls?" I was like, "Nah, it ain't happening. Like this one's all dad's." And then the second day that we went, I bought everybody their own bag because they were just that good. So Pop Tart, beignets, They also have like a steak gumbo that they sell at the same place. Fire. Trying to think what else did I eat out there. They had like these giant corn dogs that were amazing. So, like I said, all in all, had an amazing trip. So good that I almost didn't want to come back. Like I said, the weather was fantastic. Um, got a little sunburned on my shoulders, but for the most part, tanned pretty evenly. So I didn't come back too dark. But at the same time, definitely tanned just because again, sun was out every day. Didn't get to enjoy the beach. The one time we tried to go to the beach, it was packed out, and I just wasn't going to put up with it. But with all that said, let me give some couple shout outs to the people and some of the people in the chat. Shout out to my guy Grit, always showing love with the blue heart, the lion, and the football. Shout out to Mr. Big Money saying, welcome back, my brother. Appreciate it, man. Happy to be back. Happy to be here with you guys talking Lions. Shout out to Ken saying, first time here for a live stream. Who's next to Hutchinson on the line or like at the other end of the line as DN? Listen, that's going to be the main point of this stream, right? That's going to be the number one topic that we're going to dive into today, is really just kind of going into that, because I think going into training camp, that is the most the most highly like anticipated camp battle for me, is who is going to be lining up opposite Hutch, because they have so many different options. And I think, there is a really strong case that can be made for any of these guys that we're going to talk about. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 guys, right? 6 guys that the Lions have to kind of choose between. And some of these guys played rotational roles. Some of these guys got to start. And so again, technically all of these guys did start a game, maybe not last season, but in their time with the Lions, they have started games. So it's a really interesting debate on who could actually get that spot opposite Hutch. Again, Ken saying that's awesome. I've never been to the park, but I was in Florida Disney a few times. So Disney World, like I said, Disney World is bigger than Disneyland. Like I'll say that, right? If you're looking for like what's the difference between the two, Disney World is definitely bigger, right? But if you're looking like at just the simple fact of like the money you pay plus what you're able to do while you're there, Disneyland is way better in my opinion. Like you get to actually experience everything that they have to offer because the park isn't that big. You can ride so many of the different rides, check out a lot of the different shows. More of their characters are walking around. And I think that's literally because, like I said earlier, the weather is so much better. Like it's not, it can be hot, but it's hot because the sun is out. It's not hot just because of the humidity or anything like that. And so for me, that's where Disney World kind of loses a little bit, is that it's just that's what makes Disney World tough. And it does make it a grind to get through. It's just it's hot, it's humid. You're trying to find so many opportunities to just get indoors. And hopefully, your kids don't fall out from the heat. That's what makes Disney World kind of tough. And you don't have that concern as much with Disneyland. My guy Grit said, I'll take a boat on the water over Disney without a second thought. Glad y'all had fun though. Appreciate it, man. Listen, I can't swim, so I'm definitely not taking a boat on the water. But I understand if you do. Like I said, it's a cool experience. If you've never gotten to go, if you've never gotten to take your kids, or if you have small children and you want to take them, even that's like a dope experience, just to see the joy in their eyes and being able to do different things is always cool as a parent. And Det Fan Man in the chat saying, hey peoples, what's good with you, Det? Super excited. Like I said, super excited to have you all here. Not gonna belabor the point too much. Like I said, if you guys saw the thumbnail, you saw the title, but basically the question is, right, when looking at this Detroit Lions team, right, and looking at specifically this defense, we know of the upgrades that they've made for the secondary. We know that they've added a linebacker. We know that they've added a defensive tackle. And I think a lot of attention has gone to that defensive tackle spot, because most of us expected the team to upgrade that position, more aggressively than they did. We expected bigger upgrades of talent at the defensive tackle spot, but they for the most part stay pat. And because a lot of us probably feel like they haven't addressed it enough, I feel like that position and the secondary have gotten a lot of the talking points sent their way when we're talking about this defense, because you have one area where there's this huge improvement in the secondary, and then there's this other part of the defense where it's not so much, right? But I think the part of the defense that gets overlooked oftentimes is the edge rushers. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because I think all of us feel fairly confident or feel secure enough with what we have on the edge. Obviously, you drafted Aidan Hutchinson last year, second pick overall, and finished second in defensive rookie of the year voting. Had a really impressive season, 9.5 sacks, 3 interceptions. Was definitely came on definitely down the stretch, right, of that season of them going 8-2. Definitely started putting together more consistent performances week in and week out. But this kind of came up, this topic specifically came up as far as like who should start opposite Hutch. Really came up by one of my consistent viewers here over on YouTube, Mark LeBay, who kind of pointed out that one of the guys that doesn't get talked about nearly enough when we're talking about this defense is James Houston, right? Like, how does a guy who put together 8.5 sacks not get more love? How is he not a more of a focal point of this defense, and why are not more people talking about him? And so, you know, being the person I am, um, I definitely understood Mark's point, and in looking at it as like, yo, why isn't James being talked about? But in my mind, I look at it as like it's a crowded room. And as great as James was last season, I question whether or not he's the shoe-in to get the starting spot when you have returning veteran players in Romeo Okwara and Charles Harris, and even John Kaminsky to an extent, who originally started the season out in a rotational capacity, but by the end of the season, midway through the season, was starting consistently week in and week out. And so, personally, when I look at this entire, when I look at that group, the edge rusher group, we know Aidan is starting. We know like that, cut and dry, right? There's no reason to overanalyze that. There's no reason to second guess that. The question very much so becomes, okay, well, who should start opposite him? And I feel like there's two ways we can have this conversation. We can talk about who should start next to him based off of production and stats and things like that, or we can talk about in the context of who do we think the Lions will start based off of culture and just what they've done in the past and how they want to rotate their pass rushers, because we do know that they like to do that. We do know they like to rotate different guys in. They like to mix and match packages depending on opponents, depending on down and distance, depending on what they want to do against the run versus NASCAR, all of those different types of things, right? Like, so the question really becomes like, I start to kind of look at it in this context. When we're looking at who is edge two on this defense, I almost feel like edge two is going to be very similar to how the Lions address RB1 and RB2, where there's technically an RB there isn't really an RB1 and RB2, because they're just going to rotate these guys out and try to keep the snaps somewhat consistent. I think based off of the production and based on the depth that the Lions have at this position, it's going to be very similar. I think Aiden's going to get more rest this upcoming season than he did last year, as long as, like, again, they're able to maintain this depth. So maybe his snap count comes down a bit, but overall, I do think that edge two spot is going to see a lot of rotation. I don't think you're going to see someone out there, getting 50 plus snaps, at edge two. I think you're going to see a lot of rotation because they have so many of those guys, and each of those guys can do something a little differently from the next one. So what I did actually in looking at this, what I tried to do first and foremost was look at snap count, right? And just try to get an idea of, okay, in a sample size, which I looked specifically at the last 5 games that each player played. And I looked at the last 5 mainly because Romeo only played 5. And so because of Romeo having the smallest sample size of games played, I wanted to use him as like just as kind of setting the trend of how I wanted to look at this data, because some of these guys played more games, some of these guys were injured. Like I said, Romeo obviously didn't play until later in the year. Josh Pascal was injured for a good portion of the season. John Kaminsky missed time. Julian, like, all of these guys missed time, and obviously James Houston didn't come on until like week 12 of last season. So to try to keep it as even and as fair as I possibly could, and again, it's still probably not perfect. I just try to look at, okay, the last 5 games that these guys played, what were their snap counts, who got, and then looking at their season as a whole, like who got this many starts, and so on and so forth. So let's start with Romeo first. Um, because Romeo is a veteran, and he's somebody that clearly the Lions value, and so much so that they were willing to keep him when they had the opportunity to cut him. Right? Obviously, he's coming off that Achilles injury last year, was able to, like I say, start and or at least get some playing time in Week 14 last year. Picked up 2 sacks, but for the most part, still trying to find his groove after that injury. So when looking at Romeo's, again, snap count, not necessarily looking at stats, just looking at how they used him once he was available, Romeo didn't start a game. So he had 0 starts, 119 total snaps played. 44 of those were run defense snaps, 75 of those were pass rush snaps. So clearly they utilized him way more on pass rush situations, in comparison to what, in comparison to using him on the run. And I think that may again have a lot to do with trying to keep him fresh and not trying to throw too much at him, and putting too much emphasis on that injury with trying to have him, stack and shed, linemen in the run game where he probably has an opportunity or risk of being rolled up on or anything like that, trying to kind of keep him a little safe in that regard. Next, we're going to go to the other veteran in that room, which is Charles Harris. So Charles Harris had 4 starts in the season, which were all at the beginning of the season. So weeks 1 through 4, he was starting. He played 196 snaps, 69 run defense snaps, and 120 pass rush snaps. Early on in the year, if you look at how the Lions were using their pass rushers, Charles Harris was a focal point, right? He was the starter that lined up opposite of Hutch, and he was getting a lot of run and a lot of play at that edge 2 spot. Just for context, I got all of these numbers from Pro Football for PFF. So if you want to like fact check this, as far as if you don't think that these counts are right, that's where I got all these numbers from. But his first few games, like of the season, Charles Harris was getting all of those snaps. He was, a 50 plus snaps per game type of guy opposite Hutch. And I think a lot of that had to do with a lack of depth, really. Romeo was still hurt at that point, and Josh Pascal was hurt at that point, and James Houston at this point of the season was still on the practice squad. So there wasn't a whole lot of depth. Julian and John Kaminsky were their only true like depth pieces as far as rotation. So, as you can kind of look back, and I think it was a point of a talking point last year about Aidan Hutchinson. Aidan and Charles Harris were playing so many snaps, mainly just because they didn't have a lot of depth and a lot of guys to rotate in to kind of relieve them and give them opportunities to kind of catch up. So Romeo, not a lot of starts, good amount of snaps in the 5 games that he did play. I think 119 snaps is actually like 4th or 5th on this list. So he played a really good amount down those, like, again, looking at his last 5 games. But then you look at Charles Harris, again, first 4 games of the season was doing really well, but then he suffers an injury and he was kind of out for a long stretch of time. By the time he came back in like week 9 and week 10, snap count was not the same. He was definitely like, they were trying to work him in and kind of get him up to speed, where at the beginning of the year, like I said, he was getting like those 50 snaps a game type of play. When they started trying to work him in, he was somewhere around like the teens, right? He was getting like 10 to 15 snaps per game. They were much more situational with him. And I think that's also has to do with the fact that like by that point in time, Josh Pascal was kind of getting some run. John Kaminsky was obviously getting a lot of play as well. So Charles Harris started out hot, but his snap count slowly started to kind of deteriorate as the season kind of went down. Next, I'm going to move over to James Houston, but let me jump into the chat really quick to see what you guys are saying. Really quick. Lions 1960s has never been to Disney. Maybe now I'll have to make it a pit stop and grab a Pop-Tart on my way back to Asia this fall. Add it to my bucket list. Like I'm telling you, if you've never been, it's a great trip. It's a great family trip. Me and my family, we're blessed and fortunate enough to be able to go to Disney usually every year. This is the first time we've ever done Disneyland. And we probably won't be doing it again for another 5 years because, like I said, it's expensive. Ken also saying I definitely want to go, especially since I'm also a Marvel fan. Listen, if you're a Marvel fan, Avengers Campus will be like a dream. It is so dope. Definitely ride the Guardians of the Galaxy ride and ride the Spider-Man like web slingers ride. Make sure you like do a little bit of a workout before you do the web slingers one, because you gotta actually like thwip uh and web sling a little bit, and my shoulders were on fire, and I'm in pretty decent shape, but it was like the greatest shoulder workout I think I've ever had in my life. um all right, so Ken saying in regards to the edge rushers conversation. Okay, so I think Charles Harris on the opposite end, and I think again, if you look at how the Lions started the season and who they were giving, like who won that battle and who they felt most confident in, Charles Harris was that guy. And it makes sense, right? They had just paid Charles Harris, so there wasn't like, given the money that Charles Harris was making, it made sense that he would get a bulk of the snaps. But now with him and Romeo both being in like having basically prove it deals, being on 1 year deals this upcoming season, I think it does put that up in question a little bit, as far as, is it a full blown conclusion that Romeo or Harris could dominate those starting reps, considering that you have some young options behind them. uh let's see. Ken also saying Houston will definitely fill in, and that's been my biggest point, right? That James Houston is going to get snaps. I'm not so sure if he'll start, but based on his productivity as a pass rusher, I think that's like a full blown conclusion that he's going to get in the mix, very frequently on passing down situation. Um, Lions 1960 also saying, I'm also thinking Romeo right now with the problem rotating in and out. And again, I think that's another thing that we have to kind of keep in mind, that too, like there's two edges. So like these guys are going to be rotating in and out on both sides. It's just a matter of like, okay, who's going to be rotating out the most with, Hutch, and who's going to be rotating out the most, at edge too. And if Romeo, were to get those reps because he's, healthier, and they just feel more confident about him, manning that side, especially on run situations, well, then you can start to kind of look at it and be like, okay, well, then who rotates out with Romeo? If you're going to use Romeo primarily in rundown situations, then maybe you don't have to worry about James Houston getting those rushing reps, and you can strictly use him in passing situations. Jordy asking about Pascal. I'm going to get straight into Pascal right after this one. Shout out to my guy Dan in the chat saying, hey, Miko and everyone. So I'm actually going to be on Dan's stream this Sunday. So if you guys have not checked out Inside the Dan, which is Dan's live stream over on Twitch, you should definitely do that. He's had a lot of great interviews, especially with a lot of the guys. If you're a Pride of Detroit fan, he's had a lot of great conversations with those guys. So definitely head over to Twitch and catch those other interviews that he's done. But I'll definitely be on there this Sunday, and Dan and I are going to talk a little Lions. So I'm excited about that. And Ken also saying Romeo is wanting to show he's back. And I agree. And I think that's going to kind of, again, be why this competition in camp is going to be so highly contested, is because you have so many guys that kind of have something to prove. Romeo is going to have to prove that he's back and he's healthy from his injury. Charles Harris is going to be looking to do the same. Julian's going to be in the fight of his life, I think, between him and Houston on who gets that final spot. If the Lions don't decide to carry, a ton of pass rushers. So it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be the most highly contested, position battle in camp, in my opinion. One Funky Lion fan, what's good? What you saying? Jumping in the chat saying what's good. Jordy also saying, I love Kamish, just not against rushing QBs unless he slides inside. And again, that's something that the Lions have kind of built into their edge rushers, right? A lot of these guys have versatility, whether it's being able to play the edge and then slide inside, or with the likes of like Julian and James Houston, and even Charles Harris to an extent, being able to play edge and linebacker if they are so asked to do so. So again, that's what's going to make this really interesting, heading into camp. One Monkey Lion fan also saying, in my opinion, what will happen is Harris and Houston will rotate and Romeo will back up Hutchinson. And I think that's a good possibility as well. The question I would have then is like, where does Pascal fit in? Because I think Josh Pascal is going to have a much bigger role this upcoming season than he did last year. And he actually had a really good start to his season when he first came back from injury, but they did start to dial back his snaps a bit. And I think part of that is just due to the fact that they had some veterans kind of rolling in here and there. And then my guy Mark LeBay saying, based on last year's production, if James Houston gets 25 snaps per game, he will have over 18 sacks for the season. And I mean, again, if you're going strictly off of what he did in his limited snap count last year, I can see how you come to that conclusion. I just, like I said to you, Mark, in the chat, I start to wonder where the snaps are going to come from because, again, as we kind of start to go through this conversation with some of the other guys, James Houston was the guy that started to get more snaps near the end of the season. But again, Charles Harris was down again after week 10, and Romeo just wasn't healthy. And so I start to wonder if Romeo is in better health this upcoming season. Oh, yeah, and Julian also wasn't available down the stretch. So you just start to kind of wonder is he going to get 25? Because a lot of these guys down the stretch were starting to see themselves in the teens. They were starting to get 10 to 15 snaps per game instead of those 20 to 25 snaps per game opposite Hutch. Meanwhile, like Hutch and Kamish were just like dominating the snap counts week in and week out. Shout out to my guy Luke G saying always listening and always supporting. Appreciate you, Luke. It was dope to see you again streaming this afternoon. I was glad I was able to at least catch some of it, while you were live. And then Ward saying this will be Josh Pascal's first training camp. He will come out of it as a starter. He is a worker. I expect good things. So Josh is somebody that, again, if you guys have caught a couple of these streams, if you caught some of the conversations where we've talked about pass rushers, I'm very high on Josh Pascal. I've been high on Josh Pascal since they drafted him last year. And I think he, to Mark's point about James Houston being a little slept on based on his production, I feel like people are sleeping on Josh Pascal, considering the fact that he was a second round pick, which means that they thought very highly of him. And I think they have a plan carved out for him. And I think this upcoming season, we're really going to see that kind of come to life through camp and once the season starts. So let's actually jump into, I said I was going to start with Houston, but let's go ahead and start with Josh Pascal first, because that's kind of where we're talking right now. So Josh Pascal last year had 4 starts, which were his first 4 games after he came back from injury. He was getting those starts. When he was starting, because I want to give I actually broke down what his snap count was when he was starting versus what it was, last 5 games of the season. So his first 4 starts, he got 195 total snaps. 82 of those were run defense snaps, and 113 of those were pass rush snaps, right? So they were using him frequently in those first few matchups that he was in. Now, after that, you started to see some guys come back. Charles Harris came back. John Kaminsky was getting more snaps. Julian was still there. And so those snap counts started to diminish quite quickly as they started to kind of, I feel like they started to spread that love a little bit and not try to put so much on the rookie's plate at that time. And so the last 5 games that Josh played, he went down to 83 total snaps. 34 of those were against the run, and 49 of those were pass rush snaps. So again, still being heavily used in pass rush situations, and sprinkled in here and there on rundowns. If you actually go to PFF, if you have a PFF account, you can actually see how it broke down as far as where he was lining up. And I know a lot of us have talked about the fact that hey, Josh can kick inside and play, D tackle, or he can play nose, or whatever the case may be. Well, when you look at his snap count breakdown, he lines a lot at edge. They did line him up in the middle, but primarily he was on the outside. They were lining him up on the edge frequently I think that's where they want him. And I think, so going back to Ward's point, I think he's going to go into training camp with every opportunity to earn that edge 2 spot opposite Hutch. And if he were to come out getting it, I know I would be ecstatic, because I think from a rundown perspective, just being able to defend the run, I think Josh is head and shoulders better than everybody else on this list, right? Just as far as physical talent goes. He obviously needs to learn the game, and that's where Romeo and Charles Harris and John Kaminsky have an edge over him in just experience. But I think as far as physical traits and what he can actually do in that position, I think if Josh can continue to add to his skill set, he will become the best option to start opposite Hutch if we're specifically looking at a run stuffer and you're looking at somebody too that you want to have out there on first and second down and on these short yardage situations, somebody that you want to be able to seal an edge. I think that's what Josh Pascal probably does better than any of these other edge players. The next one though on this list is James Houston, right? Is the guy that we're talking about is probably being overlooked. James is by far, and this includes Hutch, in my opinion, James Houston is by far the most natural pass rusher the Lions have. He is the most just natural bend, quickness. I think from a skill set and just how he approaches rushing the passer, I think he just does it at a better level. If James Houston was 6'3" to 6'5", if he had Hutch's height with everything else he has, we would have been talking about James Houston as a first round pick, as like a number one overall pick last year, because that's how natural his bend and his usage of pass rush moves is. And so when we look at James, he did have two starts. He started the last two games for the Lions against Chicago and against Green Bay. In those 5 games that he played, he had 123 total snaps played. 30 of those were run defense snaps, but 93 of those were pass rush opportunities. And so it kind of shines a light on the fact of when Kelvin Shepherd talks about like them going into this offseason and James has to be able to prove that he can do more than just rush the passer. This is why, right? They only used him 30 times, right? 30 snaps to defend the run, which isn't a lot, but they heavily relied upon him on these pass rush opportunities. So in to my guy Mark's point about, hey, if he at least gets 25 snaps, he can probably get 18, sacks. I do think that's where his role is more so going to be. I don't know if he's going to necessarily beat out some of these other guys unless he takes a big step forward in being able to defend the run, right? But even if he doesn't do that, what he has shown that he is very capable of doing is you get teams in second and long, third and long situations, you can absolutely trot James Houston out there and at least feel confident that he's going to get a pressure, that he's going to rush the quarterback in and hurry up their process, if not get a sack every opportunity he has at getting on the field. Again, I can't remember. I didn't write it down, but if I'm trying to go off the top of my head, of these, edge rushers, I believe James Houston also had the most pressures. He had the most hurries. And I believe he also had the most hits. If it wasn't him, Josh Pascal also had like second most, right? As far as like pressures and hurries of these guys. And so the younger guys that the Lions have at the edge spot were very, very effective. And so this is why I think if the Lions aren't going to be stubborn, if they're not going to just go with this whole mentality of like, well, we're just going to start our veterans, this is where I think you could really get a really nice tandem of Pascal starting first and second down, Houston rotating with Pascal, and Pascal possibly kicking inside to give interior pass rush opportunities so that you basically have, Pascal in the middle, Hutch on one side, Houston on the other side, and you can either throw Kamish in the middle, and you can use honestly Romeo or Charles Harris as an additional linebacker and have them rush as well. Like there are so many opportunities for these guys. And another thing that kind of gives James Houston um a boost, and Grit is kind of saying it like right now, right? Justin Fields is still having nightmares about James Houston, is that James Houston does give you that, right? If you're talking about going into a matchup where you have a mobile quarterback and you need an edge rusher that you want to do more than just set the edge, but actually be able to chase down a mobile quarterback, this is where James Houston is going to be very effective. This is where Josh Pascal, I think, is also very effective, versus the likes of a Romeo or a Charles Harris. Julian is also very effective in this way. These guys are just a little more nimble, and it probably has a lot to do with the youth factor, right? They're younger and they just have that nimbleness to be able to stay with these mobile quarterbacks a little bit better. Real quick, J Mommy saying, I agree. Whoops. I agree with Grit. The question is a tough one. Definitely will be worked out during training camp. It's a good problem to have, been a long time since the Lions have been this stacked. And I agree. Like it is a good problem to have. That's why I don't want this to be a like I don't want this conversation to feel like, oh, we have to pick one or the other, or if this guy doesn't start, it's a travesty. I think all of these guys will get snaps. It just becomes a matter of, again, who is technically starting, which I, like I said earlier in the show, I think this is very much going to go in the same direction as how the Lions address running back, where it's edge one, edge two slash edge three. Like edge two and edge three are probably going to rotate a lot, based on down and distance, based on formations, based off matchups. Like we literally could go into multiple games this season where one game Romeo is starting, the next game Charles Harris is starting, another game Josh Pascal is starting, another game John Kaminsky is starting. Like there's that much fluidity with what they have. And it really just comes down to, like I said, there's 6 guys that I'm talking about here. You add in Hutch, that's 7. It just becomes a question of, do the Lions want to carry 7 guys? Because I don't think they would want to lose any of these guys. And if there is a guy that's probably on the outside looking in, it's the next guy that we're going to talk about, and that's Julian Okwara. Julian also had 2 starts last season. They were a little more spread out, but in the snaps count that he got, he had 124 total snaps. 40 of those were against the run, and he had 84 pass rush snaps. And if you're somebody that like puts a lot of stock into PFF grades, Julian technically was the highest graded edge rusher that they had against the run. Even though he only had 40 run defense snaps, he was graded out the best of these guys. And so Julian is someone that I like a lot. And it's somebody that I think that once we get into training camp and once we put the pads on, Julian's going to make a really strong case to make this roster. And I think he's almost going to put this team in a position where they're going to feel like they're going to have to carry 7 edge rushers, because Julian, going back to the flexibility and the versatility that they have in this defensive line, Julian is one of those guys who, again, he can play some linebacker. They actually did line him up quite a bit at right outside linebacker on a number of occasions. And while James Houston is working on that this offseason, Julian's already been doing it, and Julian's a little more comfortable at it. And so it really becomes a question of, do they like that versatility enough, and does what Julian provide in that versatility make it easier for them to do what they want to do on defense? If they feel like, hey, we need this type of player, and Kelvin Shepherd was very high on Julian last year, then it's very possible that Julian is still on this roster, and they're going to carry 7 edge rushers, and that may mean that they carry 1 less linebacker, and Julian's probably going to have to play more special teams, or James Houston is going to have to play more special teams or something of that nature. But Julian is someone, to me, that I think we've all seen the potential of what he has. The biggest issue with Julian is health. Can Julian stay healthy for a 17 game season and actually be called upon? Because when he's available and when he can be used rotationally, he shines in those small areas where he's able to be utilized. So Julian is someone, in all honesty, like I said, kind of with the same thing with James Houston, I don't think that he's really going to be that much in the mix for a starting spot. I think they have a role for him. I think they know how they want to utilize Julian, and that's what's going to happen going forward into the season. Mark LeBay saying Houston would probably lead the league if he got 18 sacks. If he got that many sacks with only 25 snaps per game, he's an all-pro in 2023. Absolutely, right? Anytime you're able to get that close or that many sacks in a season, yeah, that's a no-brainer. I just don't know. There's a lot of things that, like, I sometimes dial back expectations simply because James Houston caught a lot of people off guard last year. And I don't mean to say that to take away from what he actually accomplished, but now there's tape, and now people are going to know, like, hey, when I think he changed his number, but last year when it was 59, like, hey, when 59 comes on the field, like, people are going to know, like, hey, expect he's going to give you work. And I think you're going to get more players that are going to take him seriously. Now, with that said, I think James Houston, being the type of person he is going to continue to put in that work, and he's still going to be a force. And I think he could still push for that 8-9 sack type season just off of the fact, like I said, he's the most naturally gifted pass rusher they have, right? When it comes to 3rd and long, if James Houston isn't on the field, I'm going to be yelling at my TV. There's not going to be any reason that James Houston should not be on the field. But But Mark, I see what you're saying. I'm pumping the brakes a little bit on 18 sacks per season, for the season. But yes, if he's able to get a good chunk of the snaps, I do think for and over the course of the entire season and not just the limited, number of games that he had, yes, I absolutely see, where you're coming from in the fact that like, yo, James could absolutely produce in that way. Luke saying Julian's going to have to prove he can play linebacker. And again, I think that's what they're going to actually probably ask him to do, right? I think he's going to still play some edge in some situations, but in situations where they want a bigger linebacker, that's where I think you're going to see Julian kind of, make his bones. And I think it really just becomes a matter of how much, I think it really comes down to how much special teams can Julian play. If Julian can transition and accept a special teams role, then we're talking about him battling it out with, Jalen Reeves-Maybin in that situation. And can he beat out, one of these, last couple linebackers and just kind of rotate in here and there where technically he'll be on the roster, but he'll be listed as a linebacker instead of an edge rusher. Um, James jumping in the chat saying, I just got here, but I like Pascal opposite Hutchinson. Again, same here, right? I'm a huge fan of that tandem. I'm a huge believer in a lot of like in a lot of areas of sports where you have two young guys that you've invested in, right? Like I said, Josh Pascal being a second round pick last year, and obviously he was hurt, but I'm a huge component of just like, yo, let those young guys put that young tandem together and let them learn and let them rush opposite, each other, and build that chemistry. Obviously, that had to have been somewhat the plan when you drafted him. So, he's healthy now. Why not, just go with that going forward? Um, Dan saying Julian's path is really tough. Is Chris Covington a better use of that 10th D line, maybe? And I think that's where it really just comes down to how often do they feel comfortable playing Kaminsky, right? How often do you feel comfortable playing Kaminsky at defensive tackle? How often do you feel playing Josh Pascal at defensive tackle? Because in my mind, Christian Covington is going to be someone that they're going to utilize more so in probably like run stuffing situations. So if you're, and I think you can probably rotate those guys in with you have Aline, you have Isaiah Buggs, and you have Broderick Martin. Those are three guys that can definitely play on run stuffing situations and run stopping situations. You can definitely move in and kick in one of these other edge rushers that can play inside to play next to them. So whether that's Kaminsky, whether that's Pascal, hell, if you want to get creative and throw Hutchin on some of those situations and have Hutch rush from the middle, and have two different edge rushers on the outside, you could do that as well. I think I think it would be a better use to yes keep Julian over a defensive tackle like Covington just because of how much versatility you get with those guys, because so many of those guys can either play linebacker, D tackle, or D end. Whereas with Christian Covington, he's only going to play defensive tackle for you. And that's all that he's kind of limited to. Now, if he can be effective as a defensive tackle, then yeah, whatever. Like if he is better at playing defensive tackle than Julian is at playing linebacker or edge, then this becomes moot, right? Like there's no point in discussing it. He's a better defensive tackle. But if they're relatively the same, talent wise, but you get more versatility out of Julian, and Julian's availability makes your defense just more multiple and more versatile, I'd go Julian all day, every day. And again, like I said, he's still young, and you can kind of like Julian's, I think, also going into a prove a year in his contract. So like kind of figure that whole thing out in that situation as well. So so I talked about Julian. Oh, the last edge rusher that I do need to talk about is John Kaminsky, right? So John Kaminsky obviously like had a huge year in terms of production, in terms of snap count, and that was one of the reasons why the Lions prioritized re-signing him this offseason. Kamish had 8 starts. With those 8 starts, the last 5 games that he played, 239 total snaps, 90 run defense snaps, and 149 pass rush snaps. They used Kaminsky everywhere, right? Once they started kind of rotating in the rookies, seeing what the rookies could do and couldn't do, once Harris kind of went down, John Kaminsky was the guy that they plugged in opposite Hutch. And I think they really liked what they got. So it really just kind of comes down to, do they want to return John Kaminsky to his reserve role, or do they want to roll with what they had in that starting combination of him and Hutch and use the other guys to kind of complement him and rotate those guys in again when they're looking for just more pressure? Because John Kaminsky didn't have a ton of snacks. Like I said, James Houston had the bulk of those. And while John Kaminsky is serviceable and he definitely plays with a high effort, high motor, and I think he's probably one of their better like stunt players if they're looking to run stunts, along their defensive line. Kamish seems to do that better than anybody else. I think him and Pascal, in my opinion, do that the best. Then that's probably where he's going to get utilized. Um, but they clearly leaned heavily on him, and he's another guy that got paid. And so if they decide to go the same route that they went with Charles Harris, where hey, they paid Charles Harris, they went into the season and they were looking to start Charles Harris. The same could be, the same could be said for Kamish, where they could have paid him, go into the season and feel like, yo, we need to keep just rolling him out there, because we just feel confident, we trust him to be able to go out and do the various things that we ask of our defensive ends to do. Casey saying in the chat, just like the DBs/safeties, I like the D ends and the linebackers versatility for the coaches to plug and play depending on situation and opponent. And again, I totally agree. What you may need against a Patrick Mahomes and Kansas City Chiefs may be drastically different than what you need when you're going up against the Vikings, for example, right? Patrick Mahomes is a little more, free flowing in the pocket. He's not necessarily going to like kill you with his legs, but he can move. So maybe you go with a different pairing. Maybe you do go with a pairing of Hutch and Houston in that matchup, but then with someone that's a little more stationary, like a Kirk Cousins, a Derek Carr that you're going to see this upcoming season. Maybe that's when you're just like, hey, we can put Pascal out there and we can kind of just go more with us with a strength movement on our edges and kind of try to collapse the pocket from that way. There's literally so much versatility in this group, and I love it. And I'm personally going to be upset if one of these guys doesn't make the roster, because I think having this much versatility could really benefit this defense in the same way, like you're saying, Casey, that you do have that with the DBs and your safeties. You have so much versatility on the back end. Keep that versatility on your, on your front seven as well, to where like the offense is always going to have to be checking, and they're always going to have to be looking at who's in and try to determine what you're doing based on the package that you're rolling out. And again, make it a more difficult chess match on guys, instead of just letting offenses kind of just roll out there and know what your personnel is and just feel like they can just attack it from any which way. So that's kind of my overall thought on that. Grit saying versatility will win the day for the final roster spot. Again, whether it's versatility on the defense or again versatility in being able to play more than just defense, right? You have to be able to play more, I'm assuming, than just, I mean, if you're going to want to make this roster, especially if we're talking about, edge rusher, 4 or 5 or 6, like you're going to have to do more, because your snap count isn't going to be that high. You're going to be looking at maybe 15 snaps, 10 snaps a game type of production. Can you be productive with that snap count? And if you can't do it on the defensive end, can you at least go out there? Can you cover kicks? Can you go out there and cover punts? And again, that's why I think like Julian can still make this roster, because I think athleticism wise, he and Houston can absolutely do that with what they're able to do athletically. I think being able to contribute on special teams would be the easiest thing for them to do. Harold in the chat saying, whatever the coaches put out there, we have to believe in it. Well, okay, whatever the coaches put out there, he will have to believe in himself and just do it. Again, absolutely, right? That's a big part of playing in the National Football League, is like, again, you're gonna have to go out there and believe that you can beat the man opposite of you, right? And if you're so caught up into like, hey, who's starting, or am I gonna lose my job? Like, yo, that can't be a thought process. You have to go out there. You just have to go out there and do your job to the fullest, and let the chips fall where they may. So those are the 6 guys. So if I had to pick a guy right now who I think is going to come out of camp starting opposite Hutch, if I had to say it today, I really do think it's going to be Josh Pascal. And I'm not just saying that because it's the guy that I like the most. I just think he's going to finally be able to put it all together in his first training camp. And from whistle to whistle, I think he's just going to be able to outdo the other guys in every facet, right? I do think James Houston is going to be the better pass rusher, but I don't know if he's going to be able to hold a candle to Josh Pascal when it comes to run defense. And so, like I said, it may become a situation where Pascal is getting those first and second down snaps on the outside, but then third down comes and they're like, hey, we're going to kick you inside. We're going to take Bugs out. We're going to take Martin out. We're going to kick you inside next to Aleem. And it's going to be Hutch, Aleem, Pascal, and Houston. And that's your NASCAR package. Or again, you take out Aleem and you slide in Kamish, or you slide in Julian, or you slide, or sorry, not Julian, you slide in Romeo. And that's your NASCAR package. With the way this defense is built, I think they're going to have that like that versatility and that flexibility on third and long type of situations where they're going to have just, I mean, again, length, speed, and they're just going to be able to utilize whatever packages they want in that sense. But for me, if I had to make a bet, if I had to put my chips on anybody, it would be Josh Pascal. Now, next on that list is probably Charles Harris. They like Charles Harris a lot. And like I said, starting the season, 50, 60 snaps a game type of stuff. And that's a lot. That's a whole lot for a guy who was again coming off of a really productive season off of, in 2021. But I don't think any of us would have thought it would have been that heavily swayed, in his favor of getting that many snaps. So again, I do think the Lions love their veterans. They love to give their veterans an opportunity to hold on to a starting spot. And so when we're talking about Josh Pascal and we're talking about James Houston specifically, yeah, those guys are going to have to really push to be able to, overthrow them. I just think Josh probably has the best chance of it. Romeo, I don't think Romeo's ever going to quite be the same, right? Achilles injuries are very tricky. They definitely take a lot from your game, and they definitely take a lot from your athleticism. And so I think Romeo is going to have the hardest time just returning to form and being able to find that same level of production that got him paid in the first place, where he was able to get 9 sacks or get close to double-digit sacks in the season. That's going to be hard for him to do. But I do think he can still be serviceable in a different role. So I think if you do roll him out in a NASCAR package, yeah, I think Romeo can still probably go out there and get you 4 to 5 sacks a season. I think he's still very capable of doing that. I think Charles Harris is also very capable of doing that. If he doesn't win the starting spot, I still think he can go out there, get you 3 to 5 sacks a season, and still be very productive. But I think if you're looking for you're looking for what this team is going to want to do is that they're going to want to stop the run early. They're going to want to be able to get teams in third and long situations so that they can utilize these, this investment that they've made in their secondary and be able to have their guys break up passes or create turnovers on the back end. Well, then you need really strong run defenders. And I think Josh Pascal can be that for you. Again, John Kaminsky is going to also probably make this really tough. And I think he's going to eat up a lot of snaps as well, simply because I think they like his versatility. And so maybe it's not necessarily at edge, but I think we're going to see a lot of John Kaminsky rotating in everywhere on that defensive line, inside, outside. He's going to rotate in a lot. And so I think he's almost like a catalyst for their defense, in that like he's the chess piece that they can move anywhere and their defense can transform simply by where he's lined up, and they can mix and match off of him as well. So personally, I'm going to go Hutch and Pascal as your starters. I'm going to go Harris behind Hutch. I'm going to go Houston behind Pascal. And then Romeo and Julian and Kamish are basically going to be these chess pieces that they literally, based off of matchups, based off of game in, game out type of situations, they're going to just use them however they feel. And it may not be a consistent amount of snaps. It may not be consistently. There may be weeks where Romeo or Julian or Kamish get 10 to 15, but then another week they get north of 25, right? Just based off of that matchup alone. And the same could be said for Houston, right? There could be weeks where Houston gets somewhere between 20 to 25, and then there could be other weeks where he's getting 30 to 40, based off of a matchup, right? Like I said, I could definitely see them utilize him more against Kansas City. I can see them utilize him more against Baltimore. These mobile quarterbacks where you're going to want athleticism on the edge. That's where a guy like Houston is really going to thrive. And I think that's another reason why they may want to keep a guy like Julian, just because you have that type of versatility as well. Um, Luke in the chat saying, I think the player we will see in the DN/edge position this season is McNeil. That's interesting, and a lot of people have said that as well, just because Aleem has slimmed down, right? He wants to become a better pass rusher. He wants to be, he wants to impact the game in that way. Again, I just don't know how they do it, right? Like, I mean, again, that doesn't mean that they can't do it. I just, like I said, we just talked about there's 7 guys, right? 6 that we talked about plus Hutch, that's 7. And now you're talking about also mixing in Aleem on the edge. I guess if you're telling me that it's like a 3-4 situation, and Aleem's playing like outside defensive tackle, like slash edge, like, so technically he's on the edge, but he's still kind of playing D tackle, I could see that. But if you're talking about 4 down linemen and Aleem's on the edge, that would be interesting. But again, if we're talking about like things that you can do with stunts and things like that, then yeah, maybe, because you could have Kamish and Hutch in the middle and they're stunting, and then you have guys on the edge that are just bull rushing in. There's a lot of stuff that you can make offenses have to think about. So it really just kind of, I think I said this a couple weeks ago before I went on vacation. This to me is a season where Aaron Glenn doesn't have a lot of excuses, right? Because I think he does have the pieces to put together a formidable defense, right? You completely revamped your secondary, and we just went through 6 guys that have been productive, whether it was last season or the season before, for you as edge rushers. You have to find ways of making these guys mesh and gel, and come up with a defensive scheme where these guys are able to be productive. You have, like I said, you have a very talented pass rusher in James Houston. You have a very just talented player in Aidan Hutchinson, who can get there on his own, but he can also, play off of others and make things happen for you in your defense. You have a young stud in Josh Pascal. You have veterans in Romeo and Charles Harris that can help these young guys understand how to be prepared in games and out in practice and in games, as well as still be productive when called upon. And then you have, like I said, you have this very versatile piece in John Kaminsky that can literally, you can line up anywhere and really kind of unlock this defense to do a number of different things. So that really gives me a lot of hope, and it really does. It takes a lot of excuses away for Aaron Glenn for me. Like, there's not. Yes, there are holes at defensive tackle, but those are holes that you felt comfortable going into the season with. Like, so I can't even like give that as an excuse, because if you thought defensive tackle was such a big concern, I think you should have probably fought harder to get Jalen Carter or Kalijah Cansey, or to push your GM to trade for a defensive tackle of some kind. And I'm not saying that they should have done these things. I'm just simply saying, if Aaron, like, I can't use that as an excuse for Aaron Glenn this upcoming season. The linebacker spot, I can't really use that as an excuse. You went out and you got a middle linebacker, and you wanted to bring back Alex Anzalone. So you felt comfortable with those 2 positions, and I just feel like you have enough talent on the edges, and I feel like you have enough talent on the back end to where this defense should be formidable enough. You have to figure out how to stop the run and keep people from running it up the middle on you as a defensive coordinator. And I say that to say, like, I believe Aaron Glenn will, because I think he's always wanted to like have this defense operate from the back end to the front, versus, again, how a lot of people talk about, like, oh, well, you have to win in the trenches. I think Aaron Glenn has always wanted to win on the back end. I feel like that's always been the case. Mark saying, totally agree that Pascal gets the start. Like I said, that's a gut feeling that I have. I just think that he's going to come in and really do the things that I saw on tape from him coming out of Kentucky, being a really good run defender and being just really tenacious as a pass rusher as well. David saying, if we face a great O-line like we have, will they be able to shut us down? Up the middle, I think so. right? I think up the middle is where you're weak. And so if you can move Aleem, if you can move Isaiah Buggs, then yeah, you start to neutralize what those pass rushers can do. But again, like I was just finished saying, you as a coaching staff and as a scouting department and as a front office evaluated this roster. You evaluated your defense, and we all saw it. We all feel like there was a weakness in the middle, but you chose not to address that outside of Broderick Martin and Christian Covington and bringing back Isaiah Buggs. There weren't huge upgrades in the middle. And the same thing with the linebacker spot. Yes, you brought in Jack Campbell, but you also brought back Alex Anzalone, who did have a good season. So, like, I'm not blind to the fact that Alex had a good season. I just don't know. I don't know if he's the kind of linebacker that necessarily like takes this defense to the next level, but he does what they want him to do, and that's fine. If he just does what the team needs him to do, then that's good enough for me, I guess, and it seems to be a good enough for them. And maybe Jack Campbell has to be the guy that is basically Superman in that linebacker core. Um, but if like I said, if there's a weakness for this defense, it's up the middle, and if they go up against good offensive lines, that's probably where they'll try and beat this team. Is they'll try and move Aleem, they'll try and move Isaiah Buggs out the way, and try to get up to those linebackers. And that's a bad recipe in any situations. If you're allowing linemen to get to the second level and get guards on your linebackers, you're going to give up yardage, and it's going to look a lot like that Carolina game week in, week out. Shout out to my guy Big T in the building. Appreciate you coming by, T. Casey saying Buggs and Martin over 665 pounds of run stuffing interior. So yeah, like that's a lot of beef up the middle, right? So in theory, shouldn't happen. It shouldn't. And if it does, I blame the front office and I blame your coaching staff for allowing it to happen. Luke disagrees with me though, saying, "Come on, Miko. I doubt Aaron Glenn asked for the linebacker he got." You gonna have to prove to me he didn't, because they took him. And I would have to believe that if your defensive coordinator said that he didn't want a guy, they would not have taken him. That's the guy they took. So I'm of a strong belief that that's who they wanted. And like I said, I don't have a problem with Jack. I actually like Jack Campbell a lot. I love the pick. I think he's going to be great for them. And I think what he brings to them as far as a coverage linebacker is going to be fantastic. What you're going to have to do to help Jack thrive, and I said this in another video, first thing you're going to have to do to help him thrive, do not put him in a ton of man-on-man situations, because yes, he's a good athlete, but that doesn't mean that he's a man-on-man type of athlete. You're gonna crush Jack's confidence early if you put him out there on Travis Kelce one-on-one and expect him to contain him. Bad things are going to happen. Secondly, you are going to have to make sure, and this is with any linebacker, any middle linebacker, those defensive tackles, Buggs, Aleem, Martin, and if Christian Covington makes this roster, Christian Covington as well, those guys have to keep Jack clean, period. Because when he's able to just flow and attack, he's great. But if you allow guards to get up to the second level, if you allow guards and centers to get hands on him, he's a rookie. He's not going to have that NFL strength yet to be able to consistently, not saying that he'll never do it, but he's not going to be able to do it consistently, shed those guys and still be able to make plays on a running back if they're running dive, plays up the middle at you every single play. You're going to make his job way more difficult. But Luke, I agree with you. The linebacker core and the interior defensive line are still weak. They're not. Your strengths are on the edges and on the back end, right? And in comparison to those two groups, though the linebacker and interior D line are weaker in comparison. Grit, listen, this is always a good point, and it's something that's always worth kind of repeating. They will be practicing against a very good O-line themselves, right? And that should make guys better. How much better is the question, right? Because if you're already starting from the basement, going from the basement to the first floor isn't a big jump. It's a jump, but it's not the jump that you may want. We need to see these interior D linemen go from the basement, and I'm not saying that they're all in the basement. Aleem has played well, but Aleem needs to play consistently. He needs to go from where he's at currently, where he played that amazing game against the Giants, but then there weren't too many other games in the season like that. He needs that Giants game from week 1 to week 17. That's what he needs to do consistently. Isaiah Buggs. I don't need Isaiah Buggs to turn into Aaron Donald. I don't need him to turn into Quinnen Williams, but he does just need to be a consistent stout run stuffer, right? He needs to be a DJ Reader type of guy where, hey, teams start to realize like, hey, we can't run at Isaiah Buggs. Make teams feel like, you know what, we have to at least try to run on the edges and try and run at Hutch or try to run at Pascal because they're too stout in the middle. And then that'll make things easier, in my opinion, on your defense, because I think you have the athleticism on the outside to be able to contain runs on the outside. You just can't give guys easy lanes up the middle, which is, again, didn't happen a ton, but that Carolina game was atrocious. And it's a scary thought of like, if that's what this interior of this defensive line looks like next year, you're going to have a lot of problems. Big T saying, my question is, do y'all think our run defense is upgraded even though the interior D-line and linebacker are still weak? No, not particularly. No, I don't think it's upgraded. I don't think it's worse either. I think it's the same. I think your run defense is about the same as where it was last year. Maybe a little bit better if Campbell is better at just reading and diagnosing run plays than Anzalone, then you're in really good shape just from that alone, right? If Jack can just read, diagnose, and attack quicker and get into the backfield more consistently, then yes, your run defense will be better for that. But if we're just talking about just, again, looking at it as looking at the players and looking at who they've added, I don't see a ton of improvement. I don't see a ton of upgrades. And that's just looking at it blanketly right now. Things could look drastically different, right? Once we get into training camp, things can look drastically different when we get into preseason. They can make moves, they can make adjustments, or guys can just continue to get better going into the regular season. And I will happily eat my words on that. I will happily, right? Like, there is nothing I would want to be wrong on more than the fact that the Lions' run defense hasn't improved greatly. If we go into the regular season and it turns out they have, I'll be thrilled, absolutely ecstatic about that. Shout out to my guy Brian saying, "What's up, Miko? I believe they will use Pascal for the interior more than the edge. Also, they could rotate 6: Hutch and Romeo, Harrison, Kamish, and Houston and Pascal." And like I said, that's a thought process that a lot of people have brought up, right? That maybe they'll use Josh more in the middle, and it's very possible. I was just surprised when looking at his snap count, they didn't use him in the interior as much as I think a lot of us thought they would or did. They still used him as an edge rusher a lot. A lot of his snaps in his last 5 games and his first 4 starts were still in pass rush situations. So I still think that's where they would like to use him. They would love to use him still as an edge rusher rushing from the outside. But that doesn't mean that if they have all of these edge rushers, Brian, to your point, that they could still decide to rotate him on the inside to be able to get these other guys opportunities to make plays as well. Shout out to my guy Super Saiyan Lion in the chat saying, "What up, Miko?" Also showing some love to Luke in the chat. J Mommy saying, "I watched the highlights on Campbell. He does better on coverage than you think. He knows where the ball is at all times." And I agree. Like, that has been the number one thing that I've been praising about Jack Campbell. I don't know how he'll be as a run defender, because the NFL game is just different. And like I said, it's really going to be, I think, heavily reliant on that front 4 keeping him clean. But what he does well already, and yes, he'll have his bumps and he'll take his lumps here and there in the passing game, is I still think he's an amazing zone coverage linebacker. I think he flows very, very well. He has great eyes. He has great hands. He will be amazing passing wise. So even to Big T, to your point, while I don't think they've improved greatly in the run defense, maybe a tiny bit, I think they've improved greatly in pass defense. And I expect them to be much better against the pass, considering all of the pieces that they have. So that's kind of my overall thought on that. And then Casey saying, overall, Lions D has more talent and depth than last year and will likely perform middle of the pack to be top 20 D, which with our offense is more than enough to win the NFC North. Absolutely. I think if so, if we're talking what is enough to win, how good does this defense have to be to win? This defense, if this defense is top 20, this defense can win the North. Absolutely. If we're talking about this defense winning, if we're talking about this team, not just this defense, but if we're talking about this team winning playoff games, I think you have to be top half. I think you have to be top 15. I really, really do. Because in just like in any sport, playoff atmosphere is different. And while your offense may have done a lot of the heavy lifting to get you to that point, your defense is going to have to find ways to go up against other high powered offenses more than likely, is what you're going to be running into. And so the last thing you want to do in a playoff game is get into shootouts. You're going to need a defense that can get stops, create turnovers, and make teams earn it the hard way. And so I think in order to do that, you need a top 10, top 15 type of defense. Top 15. You don't necessarily need top 10, but you need a top 15 defense to be able to do that. You're going to need a stout run defense, and you're going to need at least 2 to 3 guys, right, on the edge that can get after the quarterback, and 1 to 2 guys in the back end that can make things happen. And I think the Lions have that. To Casey, to your point, I think they're better. I think talent-wise, they're better with talent and experience and more time to gel with this coaching staff. Yeah, they're better in that respect. David saying we don't have any top 25 rated linebackers. If Campbell, Barnes, or anyone could be a top guy, how much would it change us? A lot. I think a whole lot, because there's not. I just saw a tweet recently, right? Fred Warner was voted as like the most complete or the best linebacker in the NFL. There's not many like top tier linebackers like that, but I still feel like some of the best defenses in the NFL have great linebacker play. When you look at the Buccaneers a couple years when they were playing at like when their defense was playing at an all time high, they had Levante David and Devin White playing in the middle of their defense. When you look at, my favorite defense of all time, obviously, the Baltimore Ravens defense, having Ray Lewis in the middle. I just think like having a strong, at least a strong middle linebacker. I don't know about the other ones, but you need at least a strong middle linebacker. Luke Kuechly was someone who, again, when those Panthers defenses were good, they had a Luke Kuechly. You look at the Colts when they've been good. Darius Leonard is in the middle of that defense. Like I said, 49ers with Fred Warner, I still think you need someone strong in the middle to be able to get things done, because, again, the middle of the field can still be exploited so easily. We talk about how great Amon-Ra St. Brown is, and what does he do that is so deadly to opposing defenses? He kills them across the middle. Why? Because they probably don't have great nickels and they probably don't have great linebackers over the middle, and partially the rules too, right? We also have to throw that in there too, right? You can run across the middle easily, and you don't have to worry about linebackers taking your head off because you're running a drag route, right? There's a little more freedom in that as well. But if you have a better quality, if you have one of the better linebackers, and you don't have to worry about that, especially someone who can cover, because, again, I think the best linebackers do both. They don't just stop the run. They can actually drop back in coverage. They can line up with the tight end. Those guys, it's like it's another thing that you can cross off your list of like, oh, we don't have to worry about that. And so if that was the only thing that you had to worry about was like the interior, you can probably scheme some things up. There's some things that you can probably do to cover up some of the deficiencies that you have in your interior defensive line. But when your interior defensive line is somewhat compromised and your linebacker core isn't quite where you want it to be, well, it makes it a little bit different. That's a lot more guys that have to cover up for those two position groups that may not quite be up to snuff. So BD Buster saying, talk bad about the Lions, you might lose your job. Hashtag ESPN. Did somebody lose their job at ESPN after saying something questionable about the Lions? No, I don't know. I was on vacation, so I do know a lot of people got let go of at ESPN. Feel bad for a lot of those people. J Mommy saying they will be top 15 on defense. Look at how they adjusted the last 10 games of last year. Listen, and I'm all for it, right? Luke was talking about this earlier on his stream, kind of going off on some people that were saying that were trying to downplay the Lions' potential, but not giving reasons why. And I think the Lions have done enough, right? They've done enough on the offensive side. They've done enough adding certain defensive pieces. Again, revamping that secondary is no small feat. I think they've done enough to be better, right? And it's now, in my opinion, like I said earlier, it's on Aaron Glenn's hands. He has to make this defense a top 15 defense. He has to go into games with a game plan and a scheme that these guys can execute game in and game out. And if they can do that, and if they can execute week in and week out, there's no reason why they can't be top 15. And they have to go in with that same mentality, whatever that mentality was, those last 10 games that helped them win 8 out of those 10. That's the mentality. But again, I always want to caution, those of us that are fans in that, and realizing, like, look, those last 10 games were great. And the Lions definitely made a push and almost got into the playoffs. That momentum, though, you don't get to just pick that back up week 1, right? The Lions are going to have to find a new motivation. They're going to have to find a new mentality, and they're going to have to attack this upcoming season in a completely different way. Because the last thing they can afford to have, and I've said this in another video, they cannot start slow this year. They've done it the last 2 years under Dan, and I understand why. They haven't always had the talent. In his first year here, and last year, it was just a lot of shootouts, and this defense just wasn't playing up to the caliber they needed to win games. Going into 2023, that can't be the same thing. This defense has to come out swinging. This defense, like, more than any of the offense, I think is going to be good. But this defense, if there's a unit that needs to find a driving force that helped them be successful last year, it is that defense. Whatever helped you guys be stout and reliable those last 10, do the same thing. Find that same type of motivation. If it was Aubrey Pleasant getting fired, keep in mind, then I would probably, if I was Aaron Glenn, I would kill every defensive player. Listen, y'all remember how Aubrey got fired after y'all played like trash those first 7 weeks? If y'all come out playing trash these first 7 weeks, I'm getting fired flat out, because I think that's what it's going to be. If this defense doesn't play up to snuff, AG is going to be on his way out in Detroit. And I don't want to see that, because I like AG as a person. I think I've never got to meet him personally, but just looking at how he carries himself, how he talks about his defense, how he wants his defense to play, I like the dude. If I could interview AG, I would love to do it, because he obviously, as a former player, has the mindset that I gravitate towards when looking at defenses. And so I, more than any, probably just as much as the rest of you, right? I want to see him succeed, and I want this defense to have his back, because I don't want I don't want to see him get fired after the first 4 weeks of the season because they're 1-3 or 0-4. They've given up 30 plus points a game. I don't want to see it, right? He's too good of a person for that to happen to him, but he's got to put it together. He's got to come up with a scheme that helps this defense be better. But with that said, guys, let me get a couple more comments in here, and then I'm gonna jump out of here because I'm hungry, and I kind of want to just, I got to get some content out. Got to do some editing, so I want to get to that stuff tonight before it gets too late. Let me see. Brian saying, I think our D line will have a better opportunity to make plays now that our secondary has improved. Harris and Romeo to have bigger roles, and I also think the weight Aleem has lost will be a threat. Again, I think so. I mean, again, that's the hope, right? If Aleem's going to lose that much body fat and get a little leaner but still maintain strength, then that's all I can really ask for. I do think, like I said, Romeo and Charles Harris may not get the same snap counts that they used to get, but if they can just be veteran presences, if they can just be rotational guys, I think that, again, that adds another element, simply because, also, I forgot to mention this, by simply having more guys to rotate in, that gives you a fresher Aidan Hutchinson. Hutch won't have to play 90% of the snaps. He can play 80, 75% of the snaps and then he can be more effective because he's not exhausted play in and play out. Um, David here saying when Houston was on the field, we were a top 11 defense. With all the improvements, why not hope for a top 10 defense with a top 5 offense? And I'll simply just say because like I just think defense is that hard to play. It's not like lowering expectations because I don't think the defense can do it. I just think like the offense, the way the NFL is set up, the offense have a lot of rules and a lot of things that go in their favor. It's much easier for an offense to scheme and attack a defense than it is for a defense to scheme and neutralize an offense, right? Just with holding penalties, pass interference, not knowing what pass interference is, offenses being able to run rub routes, all these different things. Like it's a little more difficult. But I agree that like again, with the players they have, they should be better. You should not be one of the 3 worst defenses in the NFL. You need to be middle of the pack. You need to be in that top 15. I won't even be upset if they're like top, if it's 16, 17, but they need to be in that mix. Casey saying tighter coverage might help linebackers and DNs with rush support and getting to the quarterback. Coaching at this point is crucial. Absolutely. Right. And we talked about that again a couple weeks ago and I think I asked, I believe it was Jeremy about the possibility of, again, the Lions still continuing to run man coverage, even though they weren't very good at it, last year. If you can get better coverage and just tighter coverage where quarterbacks have to hold the ball a little bit longer, an additional second or two, that's going to make the world for your defensive ends and being able to pass rush. And it's going to give your linebackers more opportunities to maybe make plays on errant throws or on rush throws because the pass rush is closing in on them. So yeah, no, absolutely. Flagrant elbow here saying the Lions will have to bring it because every team will have them circled on their schedule this season. Also saying good content, Miko. I appreciate it, Flagrant elbow. And listen, that's another thing that we have to keep in mind, guys, right? As much as we want to ride the train of like, yo, last 10 games, we was on fire. The same way we feel that way, every other team in the NFL knows that too. Hey, the last 10 games of the season, this team got it going. This team is buying in. This team is being talked about in the national media. This team is being seen as a contender. There is no more, and Luke said it earlier in his stream, and I'm going to echo the same thing. There is no more looking at the Lions and circling at that as a win. So you're going to get every team's best shot. You're going to get every team's, punch in the face because they're going to look at you and they've been hearing all the talk about you being one of the better teams. So again, that's really going to make it again not it's a challenge that the Lions need to be ready for. I don't even want to say it's going to be tough because this entire season is going to be tough, but it's a challenge that they're going to have to be willing to step up to. Teams are going to expect your best shot and you're going to have to give it to them every single game. Let me see what else we got in here. Casey saying, what's your opinion on the Lions D floor and ceiling? As bad as last year at worst, or maybe top 12 D at best? I would say so at worst. At worst, I still think they're better than they were last season because I do think that secondary is just going to be better. And as bad as I think the interior D line is, I don't think that defense as a whole is going to be bad enough to be 30, 31, whatever it was, like it was last year. I still think at worst they'll probably be like 25, right? So again, better, but still not one of the better defenses in the league. And then, like I said, at best, like I said, probably like 15, 14, something like that. Because I think that secondary is going to be very opportunistic. I think you're going to get great pass rush. And so I think you'll be able to do enough to have a top, middle, like probably just outside or just inside the top 15. So whether it's 14, maybe as high as 13. But yeah, that's kind of like my range for them. And so, yeah. Shout out to Ken saying, thanks for the show today. First time here and enjoy the video topic and discussion. I'll be back next episode. I appreciate it, Ken. And I appreciate all of you guys tuning in. Like I said, first stream back, so I know I haven't been reminding you guys, but please be sure to hit the like button on this. It really helps out the channel. Be sure to subscribe if you're new. Also share this stream with other people, because like I said, really trying to grow this channel. Now that I'm back from vacation, we'll be back on our normal cadence of doing things. So, oh, shout out to BD Buster, already all over it. Completely missed that, saying hit that like button on your way out, guys. See, appreciate you guys. You guys have my back even when I'm not doing it. So, really appreciate you guys. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it there for you guys. Like I said, if you're watching this later, or if you want to just leave some comments after this finishes posting, I'll go ahead and we can kind of continue some of these conversations in the chat or in the comment section, not the chat. In the comment section, we can definitely continue doing that. But I'm gonna get out of here. I appreciate you guys like always. Like I said earlier in the stream, Dan is still, I think, probably still hanging around, but I'll be on his stream this Sunday, Inside the Dan, over on Twitch. So I'll actually make sure to leave a link in the comment section to his Twitch channel so that you guys can go check out his content, because like I said, he does a really good job. And the same way that like you guys have supported me, I want to be able to support other people that are looking to start, creating content on their own. So really, really excited to be able to do that with Dan. I'll be back streaming on Wednesday. I will have a guest. Ryan Matthews over at Pride of Detroit will be coming by the channel. So me and Ryan are going to sit here. We're going to talk Lions. We may even revisit this topic, because I'd be really interested to kind of get Ryan's take and kind of get an idea of who he might see and how he feels like the Lions might address the edge 2 spot on this defense. So definitely come back on Wednesday. We'll probably be starting around the same time, 6:30. And yeah, we'll have a really good conversation with Ryan. But like always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for coming by. Appreciate you guys for engaging with all the content that I was posting while I was on vacation. Really made me feel good to know that you guys were still willing to watch stuff, even though I wasn't streaming live. So super excited to be back. Can't wait to, again, continue this conversation with you guys on Wednesday. But like always, thank you. Hit the like button on the way out. Hit the subscribe button. Share this channel with your friends, with your family, other Lions fans. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.